I found out my husband was in the hospital, but his mother blocked me from visiting. This is family business, not yours, she said coldly. I waited until she left the room, and that's when the nurse told me the shocking truth she didn't want me to know. I found out my husband was in the hospital, but his mother blocked me from visiting. This is family business, not yours, she said coldly. I waited until she left the room, and that's when the nurse told me the shocking truth she didn't want me to know. It started with a phone call that flipped my world upside down. I was at work, halfway through my shift, when my phone buzzed on my desk. I almost ignored it, thinking it was another spam call, but something made me check. It was my sister-in-law, Jenna. We weren't close, just the occasional holiday gatherings and awkward small talk. For her to call me out of the blue? It had to be serious. I picked up, and her voice came through in a frantic rush. Have you heard about Mark? My heart skipped. No. What happened? He's in the hospital. It's bad, Maria. They rushed him to Mercy General this morning. I felt the floor drop out from under me. Mark and I had our issues, everyone does after 5 years of marriage, but I never imagined something like this. He was fine when I left for work. Tired, maybe, but he said he was just stressed from work. I asked Jenna what happened, but she didn't have the details. Just that he collapsed and an ambulance took him away. I hung up and ran to my boss's office, babbling something about an emergency before I rushed out. I don't even remember the drive. It was a blur of panic and 1,000 questions. Was he conscious? Was he in pain? Why didn't anyone call me sooner? When I got to the hospital, I made a beeline for the front desk. My husband, Mark Turner, he was brought in this morning. Where is he? The receptionist typed on her computer, her face blank and businesslike. Room 214. Only immediate family is allowed. I felt a wave of relief. Immediate family, that was me. I was his wife. I hurried to the room, my heart racing. But when I turned the corner, I ran right into his mother, Barbara. She was standing in front of his door, arms crossed, a look on her face that could freeze fire. Barbara had never liked me. I knew that from day one. She thought Mark could do better, and she never missed a chance to remind me of it. I tolerated her for his sake, but we were never close. Even so, I never thought she would take it this far. She stepped in front of the door, blocking my way. You shouldn't be here, she said, her voice icy. I blinked, stunned. I'm his wife. I need to see him. What happened? Her eyes narrowed. This is family business. You wouldn't understand. I stared at her, speechless. Family business? I was his family. Move, Barbara. I need to see him. She didn't budge. He doesn't need you here, stressing him out. Go home, Maria. I felt my face flush. I have every right to be here. What's wrong with him? She crossed her arms tighter, her lips curling in disgust. He's fine. It's just exhaustion. He needs rest, not you hovering around. Just go. I knew she was lying. I could see it in her eyes. But before I could say another word, she waved to a nurse and said, "This woman is disturbing my son. She's not allowed in." The nurse looked uncomfortable, but nodded. "Ma'am, we need to keep the area calm. If you're causing a disturbance, I'll have to ask you to leave." I was stunned. I'm his wife. Barbara's face was stone cold. Then act like it and stop causing a scene. I wanted to scream, to push past her, but I was too shocked. The humiliation sank in, heavy and cold. People were staring. I could feel their eyes on me, judging. I didn't want to give Barbara the satisfaction of seeing me break down. So I turned and walked away, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. I went to my car and sat there, staring at the hospital entrance. I felt sick. Something was wrong, and Barbara was hiding it from me. I tried calling Mark's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted him, begging for a reply, but nothing came. I was about to go back in when I saw Barbara leave the hospital. She looked angry, her face twisted as she talked furiously on her phone. I watched her get into her car and drive off, her tires screeching as she sped away. I knew this was my chance. I went back inside, my heart racing as I approached the nurse's station. I saw the same nurse who had sided with Barbara earlier, and I went straight up to her. "Please," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm Mark Turner's wife. I need to see him. His mother is lying to me, and I need to know if he's okay." The nurse looked around, like she was checking to see if Barbara was watching. She hesitated, then sighed. "Room 214. But, there's something you should know. I leaned in, my pulse pounding. What is it? She lowered her voice. He had a heart attack. A major one. He almost didn't make it. I felt the world spin. A heart attack? But, how? He's only 34. She looked at me sadly. It was stress. A lot of it. And, this isn't the first time. He's been here before, more than once. But his mother always took care of everything. She didn't want you to know. I felt like I'd been punched. What? The nurse's eyes were sympathetic. I shouldn't be telling you this, but, she made us put her down as his emergency contact. Every time. She always said you were, out of the picture. I felt my knees go weak. Out of the picture? I was his wife. Why would he let her do that? Why would he keep this from me? The nurse touched my arm gently. He's awake now. Go see him. But, be prepared. He's been through a lot. I nodded, barely able to breathe as I walked to his room. I opened the door, and my heart broke. Mark looked so small, pale, and fragile in that hospital bed, hooked up to wires and machines. His eyes opened when he heard me, and the look on his face was pure shock. Maria? His voice was weak, like he could barely believe it was me. I walked over, tears filling my eyes. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you let me be here for you? He looked away, his face full of shame. She said it was better this way. That you'd only worry, that you didn't need to deal with this. I felt the anger boiling up. She lied to you. She lied to me. How long has this been going on? He closed his eyes, his body sinking into the bed. Since the first heart scare, 2 years ago. 2 years. 2 years he'd been suffering, and I had no idea. 2 years she'd been keeping me in the dark, pretending like everything was fine. I felt the room spin, rage and betrayal crashing over me. This wasn't just about Mark's health. This was about control. Barbara had been controlling him, controlling us, and I was done letting her win. I wasn't going anywhere. Not this time. I stood there, staring at my husband, trying to process everything he just told me. 2 years. For 2 years, Barbara had been keeping his health a secret. She knew he was sick, that he was fighting for his life, and she kept me out of it. I felt sick. Angry. Betrayed. I took a deep breath, my hands shaking. Why would you listen to her? Why didn't you tell me? He looked away, his eyes fixed on the window, his voice hollow. She said it was better this way. That you had enough to deal with, that it would only burden you. He swallowed, his jaw tightening. She said you'd leave if you knew how weak I was. I felt like I'd been punched. You think I'd leave you for being sick? Mark, I married you. For better or worse, remember? He looked at me then, his eyes full of pain. She made me feel like a burden. Like I was, broken. I didn't want you to see me like this. My heart shattered. This wasn't just about his health. Barbara had gotten into his head, made him feel worthless. She'd used his fear to control him, to drive a wedge between us. I felt the anger rising, hot and sharp. She did this. She made you feel this way. He didn't answer, but his silence said enough. I wanted to scream. To find her and make her pay for what she'd done to him, to us. But I knew I had to keep it together. For Mark. I stayed by his side the rest of the day, holding his hand, telling him how much I loved him, how we'd get through this together. But inside, I was seething. I wasn't going to let Barbara get away with this. Not anymore. When the nurse came in to check on him, I asked, does he have a medical proxy? Someone in charge of his care? The nurse hesitated, glancing at Mark. His mother is listed as his medical power of attorney. She's been handling all his paperwork and decisions. I felt my blood boil. Of course she was. She'd made sure she was the one in control, cutting me out completely. I looked at Mark. Did you know about this? He looked away, his face flushing with guilt. She told me it was just paperwork. That it was easier for her to handle since she was there when it happened. I felt my hands clench. She'd manipulated him again. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. We're changing that. Tomorrow. His eyes widened. But, she'll be furious. I met his gaze, my voice firm. I don't care. She's done enough damage. I'm your wife. I should be the one making decisions if you can't. Not her. He looked like he wanted to argue, but then his shoulders slumped, defeated. Okay. Do whatever you think is best. That night, I went home to get some rest, but sleep wouldn't come. I kept thinking about everything she'd done. She made him feel worthless, isolated him, controlled his medical care, she'd taken over every part of his life. And I let her. I was so focused on our marriage problems that I didn't see what she was doing. I blamed myself, but I was done feeling guilty. It was time to fight back. The next morning, I went straight to the hospital lawyer's office and started the paperwork to transfer medical power of attorney to me. The lawyer looked surprised when I told him who I was. I thought his mother was handling everything. Not anymore, I said firmly. I'm his wife, and I'm taking back control. He didn't argue. He just handed me the forms, and I signed them, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. It was a small victory, but it was a start. When I got back to Mark's room, Barbara was there, sitting by his bed, holding his hand. She looked up, her eyes narrowing when she saw me. What are you doing here? I smiled, keeping my voice calm. Visiting my husband. Is that a problem? Her eyes flashed. I told you to stay away. He doesn't need you here. I walked over, standing next to Mark. Actually, I think he does. And I'm not going anywhere. She opened her mouth to argue, but then she saw the paperwork in my hand. Her face went pale. What is that? I held it up, letting her see the signatures. Medical power of attorney. It's mine now. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw real fear. Then her face twisted with anger. You can't do that. I've been taking care of him. Not you. You weren't there when he needed you. I felt my jaw tighten. Because you made sure of that. You lied to me. To him. You manipulated him into thinking he was worthless, that he was a burden. You kept me away so you could control him. She stood up, her body shaking with fury. I did what was best for him. You're too weak to handle this. You never deserved him. I felt my heart pounding, but I kept my voice steady. I'm his wife. You don't get to decide what's best for him. Not anymore. She looked at Mark, her voice softening, trying to play the victim. Mark, you're not going to let her do this, are you? After everything I've done for you? Mark looked at her, his face pale, his eyes full of pain. I don't want to fight. I saw the guilt in his eyes, the fear. She still had her claws in him, making him feel like he owed her something. I wasn't going to let her win. I stepped in front of him, blocking her view. We're done here. You need to leave. Her mouth dropped open. You can't just throw me out. I'm his mother. I looked at her, feeling a cold sense of satisfaction. I can and I will. You're no longer his medical contact, and you're not welcome here. If you don't leave, I'll have security escort you out. Her face turned red, her hands shaking. You ungrateful little, I didn't let her finish. I pressed the call button, and when the nurse came in, I said calmly, this woman is disturbing my husband. Please remove her. Barbara's face twisted with rage, but she knew she'd lost. She looked at Mark one last time, her eyes filled with bitterness. You'll regret this. You'll see. She'll leave you the moment things get hard. Mark didn't look at her. He just stared at his hands, silent. Her face crumpled, and she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, my heart pounding, my body trembling with adrenaline. I'd finally stood up to her. But this was only the beginning. Barbara wasn't the type to give up easily. And I had a feeling she was already planning her next move. After Barbara stormed out, the room felt heavy, like the air had thickened with all the things left unsaid. Mark wouldn't look at me. He just kept his eyes fixed on his hands, his shoulders slumped, his face pale and drawn. I sat down beside him, waiting for him to say something, anything. But he didn't. I reached out, placing my hand over his. I did this for us. For you. He pulled his hand away, his face twisting in pain. You don't understand. She's all I have. His words hit me like a slap. What about me? I'm your wife. He finally looked at me, his eyes hollow. You don't get it. She was there when I almost died. She saved me. She took care of everything. She made me feel safe. I felt my chest tighten. She made you feel weak. She made you think you couldn't survive without her. His jaw clenched. You weren't there. I opened my mouth to argue, but the words caught in my throat. He was right. I wasn't there because I didn't even know he was sick. Because Barbara made sure I was out of the picture. But Mark couldn't see that. Not yet. I stood up, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm going to get you through this. Whether you believe it or not. He didn't answer. He just turned away, his body curling in on itself. I left the room, my heart heavy, my mind racing. I thought taking back control would be enough, but Barbara's claws were deeper than I realized. She had him convinced that he needed her. That she was the only one who could save him. I knew I needed help. I called Jenna, hoping she'd shed some light on what was really going on. She picked up on the second ring, her voice wary. Maria? What's going on? Mom just called me, freaking out. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. I found out about Mark. About his heart problems. She blocked me from seeing him. She's been hiding everything from me. Jenna was quiet for a moment before she spoke, her voice low. I tried to tell her it wasn't right, but she wouldn't listen. She said it was for his own good. I felt a surge of anger. How is lying to him good for him? She's manipulating him, Jenna. She's making him think he needs her. Jenna sighed. That's what she does. She's always controlled him, controlled all of us. She's good at it. I ran my hand through my hair, frustrated. There has to be a way to break this. To make him see the truth. Jenna hesitated. There's something you don't know. About the first heart attack. My heart skipped a beat. What is it? She lowered her voice, like she was afraid someone might hear. It happened at her house. After they had a huge fight. I don't know what it was about, but Mark was furious. He stormed out, and then he collapsed in the driveway. She called 911 and rode with him to the hospital. But, she told the doctors he was staying with her because you were separated. That's why she was put on all his paperwork. I felt my blood run cold. We were never separated. We had an argument, but I never moved out. Jenna's voice cracked. I know. But she made it sound like you left him, like he was alone. She played the hero, the savior. She made him believe you abandoned him. I felt sick. That was her plan all along. She created a crisis, then stepped in as his rescuer, twisting the truth to make me look like the villain. It wasn't just manipulation. It was gaslighting. I hung up with Jenna, my head spinning. I thought taking back medical power was the answer, but this went deeper. She was rewriting history, making Mark question everything, even my love for him. No wonder he was so distant, so broken. She made him believe I didn't care. I knew I needed to confront her. I drove to her house, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I pulled up, her car was in the driveway. Good. I was done playing nice. I banged on the door, my heart pounding with anger. She opened it, her face cold and hard. I have nothing to say to you. I pushed past her, forcing my way inside. Too bad. You're going to listen. She slammed the door, her eyes blazing. How dare you barge into my house? How dare you lie to Mark? How dare you make him believe I left him? You twisted everything to make him think he needed you. That's sick, Barbara. Her face went pale, but she quickly recovered, her eyes narrowing. I did what was necessary. You weren't there. He was broken, falling apart. I was the one who held him together. You were the one who broke him in the first place. You told him we were separated. You made him think I didn't love him. You manipulated him because you need to be in control. You're poisoning him against me, against everyone. She crossed her arms, her face tight with fury. He needs me. You don't understand. He's weak. He's always been weak. I'm the only one who can take care of him. I took a step closer, my voice low and cold. No. You made him weak. You've spent his whole life making him think he's nothing without you. But that ends now. Her lips curled into a cruel smile. You really think he'll believe you over me? I've been by his side since day one. I know every secret, every fear, every mistake he's ever made. You've been married for 5 years, and you think you can break the bond we have? You're nothing compared to me. I felt a chill run down my spine. She wasn't just controlling, she was obsessed. She didn't see Mark as her son. She saw him as her possession. And she was willing to destroy anyone who got between them. I turned to leave, but she grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. You'll fail. He'll never choose you. He's too weak to stand up to me, and you're too weak to save him. I yanked my arm free, glaring at her. Watch me. I walked out, slamming the door behind me, my heart racing. Barbara was unhinged, and she wasn't done fighting. I knew she'd come at me with everything she had, but I wasn't backing down. I loved Mark, and I was going to save him, even if it meant going to war with his mother. But as I drove away, I couldn't shake the fear in my gut. She'd already twisted his mind, made him doubt me, doubt himself. And I didn't know if I could undo that damage. Because she was right about one thing, Mark was weak. And she was betting on him being too weak to fight her. I just had to prove her wrong. I went back to the hospital the next day, ready to fight for my husband. But when I walked into his room, I found Barbara sitting by his bed, her hand on his, her voice soft and soothing. She was leaning in close, her expression tender, like she was some kind of saint. Mark looked exhausted, his face pale, his eyes dull. But when he saw me, his body went rigid, his eyes flicking nervously between me and his mother. I could see the fear, the confusion. She'd gotten to him again. Barbara straightened, her face hardening as she turned to me. What are you doing here? I walked up to her, my jaw tight. I'm here to see my husband. And you need to leave. She stood up slowly, her chin held high. I don't take orders from you. Mark needs me. She looked down at him, her voice softening. Tell her, Mark. Tell her you need me here. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked trapped, like a child caught between two parents fighting. His eyes flicked to me, pleading, but he didn't say anything. I felt my heart break. She had him so twisted up inside that he couldn't even stand up for himself. For us. I looked back at Barbara, my voice cold. You've done enough. It's time for you to go. Her eyes blazed with fury. How dare you speak to me like that? After everything I've done for him? For you? For me? I laughed, the sound bitter. You lied to me. You kept me away from my own husband. You made him believe I didn't love him. That's not helping. That's controlling. That's cruel. She crossed her arms, her face smug. He needed me. You couldn't handle it. You were too busy with your own life to notice he was falling apart. I felt the sting of her words, but I pushed it down. You made sure of that. You isolated him. You made him dependent on you. You made him believe he was weak. Her face twisted with anger. Because he is weak. He's always been weak. And if it weren't for me, he'd be dead by now. You think you can save him? You think your love is enough? You're nothing but a distraction. A selfish little girl playing house. I took a step closer, my hands shaking with rage. I'm his wife. You don't get to decide what's best for him. Not anymore. She laughed, the sound sharp and cold. You think you've won because of that stupid paperwork? You think his signature can break the bond we have? He'll never choose you over me. Never. I looked at Mark, my eyes pleading. Mark, please. Tell her to leave. Tell her you need space. Tell her you need me. He looked at me, his eyes filling with tears. But he still didn't speak. His lips moved, but no sound came out. His hands trembled, his face twisting with pain. Barbara smiled, triumphant. See? He can't. He knows who really loves him. Who's been there for him since day one. I felt my heart sink. I was losing him. She was right there, her poison seeping into him, making him doubt everything. I didn't know how to fight that. I didn't know how to reach him. Then the door opened, and Jenna walked in, her face pale, her eyes wide. She looked at all of us, her gaze lingering on Mark. I need to say something. Barbara's face tightened. Not now, Jenna. This is none of your business. Jenna's hand shook, but she stood her ground. It is my business. I can't keep quiet anymore. She looked at Mark, her eyes filling with tears. Mark, you need to know the truth. Mark looked confused. Truth? About what? Jenna's voice trembled. About what really happened the day of your first heart attack. About why you were so upset, why you collapsed. Barbara's face went white. Jenna, don't. Jenna ignored her, her eyes locked on Mark. You were at Mom's house that day because she called you. She told you Maria was cheating on you. That she was planning to leave you. I felt the room spin. What? Mark looked stunned. She said, his eyes flicked to Barbara, his face crumpling in pain. You told me, you said. Maria was having an affair? Barbara's face was stone cold. I did what I had to do. You were falling apart. I needed to protect you. Mark's face twisted in horror. You lied to me. You made me believe, you made me hate her. Barbara's voice was calm, almost too calm. She was pulling you away from me. I couldn't let that happen. I did what was necessary. Jenna stepped closer, her voice shaking. You don't get it, Mark. She's been lying to you for years. She lied about Maria. She lied about me, about Dad. She twists everything to make you believe you can't live without her. Mark's face crumpled, his body shaking. Mom, how could you? Barbara's face broke, tears filling her eyes. I did it because I love you. Because I couldn't let her take you away from me. You're all I have. Her voice cracked, her body trembling. You're all I have left. Mark looked at her, his eyes wide with shock. You did all of this, because you couldn't let me go? She nodded, her face crumpling in pain. You're my baby. My only son. I couldn't lose you. Not to her. Not to anyone. Mark closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. You didn't just lose me. You destroyed me. You made me doubt everything, everyone. Even myself. He looked at me then, his face full of guilt. I'm so sorry, Maria. I believed her. I let her come between us. I ran to him, wrapping my arms around him, feeling him break down in my arms. It's okay. We'll get through this. We'll get through this together. Barbara collapsed into the chair, her body shaking with sobs. I was trying to save you. Mark looked at her, his face broken. You didn't save me. You destroyed me. And you almost destroyed my marriage. I can't forgive you for that. Her face crumpled, her body folding in on itself. She looked so small, so broken. But I couldn't feel sorry for her. Not after everything she'd done. I held Mark as he cried, his body shaking, his heart breaking. And I knew we had a long road ahead of us. Healing would take time, and trust would take even longer. But at least the lies were out in the open. The truth was finally known. And Barbara's reign of control was over. For the first time in years, Mark was free. And so was I.